There's this thing called childhood trauma, where he tried to fit in, couldn't fit in. In some worst case scenarios, he was ostracized, bullied, teased, rejected. And he thought, I'm no good at this social game, so I'm just going to find a special interest of a non-social nature, and I'm going to hyper-focus on that, and I'm just going to detach from the world. Which is not a great move on one hand, because now he's missing opportunities to gain social skills. Then he grows up being on the receiving end of disapproval pretty much his entire life. Then he hooks up with this NT wife, and things go well for a while, but after a short while, she gets unhappy because she's experiencing some of these traits and labeling it something that it's not. And then now yet again, you're hooked up with somebody who, now you're on the receiving end again of disapproval.
Hey, did you know that females with ASD level 1 often present with a unique set of characteristics that can make diagnosing their disorder very difficult? Also, their strengths often mask their deficits. Now, some autistic females have obvious social difficulties, but others appear to have excellent skills because they imitate the behaviors of others, often without understanding the reason behind those behaviors. Now, there are many autistic-like females who do not receive a diagnosis because, compared to males, they have fairly good social skills, particularly when interacting with others in a one-on-one situation. They also have special interests that are different than males, and they have traits that are different than males. Hey, quick message to neurotypical wives. If you find that your autistic husband does not want to discuss things with you, especially relationship problems, or if you find that he's actually lying to you, either directly or lying by omission, I'm not saying it's right, but he's doing that because he doesn't trust you. Why doesn't he trust you? Because he's afraid to talk about things or uncover things for fear that it will result in conflict, and conflict raises anxiety. So if you find that he's not cooperating with you, he doesn't want to discuss things with you, he's even lying to you, it's all about anxiety reduction. I'm not saying it's right, but he doesn't trust having conversations with you. A quick message to neurodiverse couples. Did you know that the behavior that you point out to your spouse is the behavior that's likely to increase? For example, if you point out the things that they're doing wrong, how they're failing you, how they're falling short, they're likely to increase that behavior despite you. If you point out what they're doing right and what you appreciate, they're likely to increase that behavior to please you. Hey, did you know that your autistic spouse is allergic to the 3 C's? Yeah, he's allergic to conflict, he's allergic to criticism, and he's allergic to crowds, especially noisy crowds. So when you're trying to make sense of him, think allergy, 3 C's. Picture this. You're spring cleaning the dresser and you find an old note in your husband's sock drawer. It's been folded so many times the paper feels like tissue. Written in 8th grade handwriting, it says, "No one will ever love you." That's the instant the bully who haunted him in middle school unpacked his bags and moved into your marriage 22 years later. Those words never stayed in the past. They become the default program. He can land a 6-figure deal and still feel like the kid nobody picked for dodgeball. If you've watched him wave away a promotion, flinch at a compliment, or jump when you laugh too loudly, you're seeing an old bruise get pressed again. A simple thing like playground cruelty rewires a guy's brain to think, I'm inherently unlikable, and how that silent script quietly torpedoes the relationship you're both trying to save. Most guys file bullying under ancient history. They shrug it off and say, kids were kids. But the brain is the worst librarian. It never forgets. Each rejection lights up the same circuits as a stubbed toe, and the alarms stack up. There's a cumulative effect over time. They're called flashbacks. Now, fast forward to now. His amygdala, that little walnut-sized part of your brain, well, his amygdala is an overcaffeinated smoke detector, and it screams danger a lot. For example, when you tease him about mismatched socks or about him taking too long to text you back, amygdala says danger. He isn't seeing you in the moment. He's watching a highlight reel of every time he was the last one picked for dodgeball. Inside his head lives a tiny editor with a big red marker. Every sentence he speaks, crossed out. Every action he takes, annotated, not good enough. On loop in his head, he hears, they're laughing at you again. She's disappointed in you again. You'll never measure up. These aren't passing thoughts. They're carved in, hardwired. And since man up is still the unofficial motto, he rarely talks to you about this past trauma. Instead, he goes quiet, pulls longer hours at the office, or fires at you at the first perceived insult to keep shame at arm's length. To you, his disappearing act looks like he doesn't care. You've probably tried to compliment him on occasion. You've probably tried to show some appreciation for what he does. Those words of appreciation, those compliments, ricocheted off a wall of evidence labeled, I'm ugly, I'm weird, I'm unlovable. Praise clashes with the internal story, and the brain likes tidy stories more than it likes happiness. So he rejects the praise or the compliments to keep his narrative neat. And you end up feeling shut out, and he stays stuck proving, see, I told you, even she doesn't like me. Did you know that brain scans show social rejection activates the dorsal anterior cingulate, the same spot that throbs when you slam your finger in a door? Years of rejection thicken the prefrontal cortex's self-monitoring circuits. The guy becomes a human error detector. Now you add testosterone's talent for locking down emotional vocabulary, and you've got a spouse who feels pain, yet labels it irritability. The wound isn't weakness. It's biology playing defense. So as the NT wife, what can you do? First rule, don't wrestle the inner critic, saying to him, oh, that's ridiculous, you're an amazing guy. Just pits you against the bodyguard trying to keep him safe. Get curious instead. When he winces, ask, what did that feel like? Your calm question tells his nervous system that the war is over, the battle between the two of you. Second, drop micro-attunements. A hand on the shoulder when he's staring at the rug, or a soft message coming from you saying, I'm still here for you after he snaps. Super important. Third, invite, never shove. For example, try saying, I've noticed you go quiet when I praise you. No rush, but I'm here when you're ready. Seed planted, no bulldozers. Decades of shame doesn't just clock out after one heartfelt talk. Therapy helps. Psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or whatever gives the inner critic a name and a chair to sit in. But keep stacking new evidence that he's a good person. Every time he risks being vulnerable and you stay steady, his brain files a new note. Maybe I'm not intolerable. Think of it as upgrading the operating system patch by patch. He's been on the receiving end of disapproval much of his life. And the bully's last punch wasn't the bruise. It was the story that followed. You'll always be unlovable. At some level, you're defective and flawed. You're weird. You're odd. You'll never measure up. But stories are just stories. Every time you, as the NT wife, answer with curiosity instead of correction, every time you witness his wobble without flinching, you slide him a new pen to write a new story. And slowly, the man who once folded that cruel note into a tiny square begins to unfold it, sees it for what it is, just paper, and writes a fresh line. I was never broken. I was hurt. And healing is possible together with my wife. In today's video, we're going to talk about 5 ways complex trauma can look like adult autism and why getting this right actually matters. Now, let me start with something I see all the time. An adult comes into my office or writes me online and says something like, I think I might be autistic, I struggle socially, I feel overwhelmed easily, I shut down under stress, I've always felt different, and so on. Now, here's the part that really matters. They're not wrong to ask that question or those questions. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, what they're really dealing with is complex trauma, not autism. I've lost track of the number of times that there's actually trauma going on, not so much ASD. Now, here's why this conversation matters so much. If you treat trauma like autism, you can accidentally normalize suffering that actually needs healing. And if you treat autism like trauma, you can accidentally pathologize a nervous system that simply works differently. So today, I have to walk you through 5 ways that complex trauma, also referred to as CPTSD, can look a lot like adult autism, especially on the surface. Now, this is not about self-diagnosing, it's not about labeling yourself, and it's definitely not about dismissing autism. It's about clarity, because clarity changes what actually helps. Now, here's one quick important note before we begin. You can be autistic and have complex trauma, okay? They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. But what we're doing here is learning how to separate traits from adaptations and wiring from wounding. Okay, let's start with number 1. Let's talk about social withdrawal and feeling different. One of the most common reasons adults suspect autism is this deep sense of, I don't fit in, I feel separate, I don't know the rules. Now, in autism, this often comes from neurological differences in social processing. But in complex trauma, Social withdrawal usually develops for a different reason. In trauma, withdrawal is often protective. If you grew up in an environment where people were unpredictable, emotional expression was punished, and safety depended on reading the room perfectly, your nervous system learned something very early. Connection is dangerous. So you didn't fail at socializing, you adapted by minimizing exposure. And over time, that adaptation can look like awkwardness, overthinking conversations, avoidance of groups, feeling like you're behind socially. But the root isn't a missing social instinct. It's a nervous system that learned safety through distance. Now here's the key distinction. Autism is about difference. Complex trauma is about defense. And defenses can soften when safety increases. Now let's talk about sensory sensitivity and overwhelm. Another huge overlap is sensory overwhelm. Bright lights, loud noises, crowded spaces, too much input, and so on. Now, in autism, sensory sensitivity is often hardwired. The nervous system processes stimulation more intensely, period. But in complex trauma, sensory sensitivity is usually threat-based. When someone has lived for years in fight or flight, their nervous system stays tuned to danger. That could mean sounds feel sharper, movements feel intrusive, environments feel chaotic, the body never fully settles. Now, this isn't because the brain is wired differently. It's because the threat detection system never got to stand down. So the body reacts to neutral stimulation as if it's a threat. Now here's a coaching insight I want you to hear. Listen, trauma makes the world feel loud because the volume knob on safety is broken. And that's very different from a brain that was always wired to receive input intensely. Now let's talk about emotional shutdown and flat affect. Many adults say, people tell me I seem flat, or I don't show much emotion, or I shut down instead of reacting. Okay, well this can look like autism from the outside. But in trauma, emotional shutdown is often freeze, not like a feeling. If expressing emotion once led to criticism, dismissal, escalation, punishment, your nervous system learned feeling is unsafe. So emotions didn't disappear, they went underground. Now what trauma survivors often experience isn't emotional absence. No, it's emotional inaccessibility. The feelings are there, but the pathway to express them is blocked. And here's the big difference. In autism, emotional expression may be different, but in trauma, emotional expression was often shut down to survive. Now that distinction matters when choosing treatment. That's the big message here. Now let's talk about rigid thinking and the need for control. Another overlap is rigidity. Strong routines, discomfort with change, black and white thinking, and so on. Now in autism, structure often helps regulate a nervous system that thrives on predictability. But in complex trauma, rigidity is often about control after chaos. If your early life was unpredictable, emotionally, relationally, or physically, your system learned, if I control the environment, I reduce danger. So routines become safety. Certainty becomes safety. Rules become safety. The rigidity isn't preference, it's prevention. And that's why trauma-based rigidity often loosens as safety increases, while autistic structure remains supportive even in safe environments. Now let's talk about masking, people-pleasing, and identity confusion. This one is subtle and incredibly important, so listen up. Both autistic adults and trauma survivors often talk about masking, but the why is way different. In autism, masking is often about learning social behaviors that don't come intuitively. In complex trauma, masking is about staying emotionally safe. So if you learned early that being yourself leads to rejection, needs cause conflict, authenticity is not tolerated by other people, I can't be myself, you become a shape shifter, not because you lacked identity, but because identity wasn't safe. And over time, this can create exhaustion, identity confusion, chronic self-doubt, a sense of being hollow. Here's the coaching reframe. Listen, trauma doesn't erase the self. It hides it until safety returns. Now let's talk about why this distinction actually matters. Why am I making such a big deal about this? Okay, because the wrong explanation leads to the wrong help. If someone with trauma is told, well, this is just how you are, they may stop seeking healing that is actually possible. And if someone with autism is told, well, this is trauma, you need to fix it, they may spend years trying to change something that doesn't need fixing. So clarity creates compassion for yourself and others. Now let me leave you with this. You're not broken because you struggle. You're not defective because things feel hard. And you're not too much or not enough for asking the right questions. Whether you're exploring autism, trauma, or both, what matters most is this. Understanding why your nervous system does what it does is the first step toward giving it what it actually needs. In this video, I want to talk about when CPTSD meets ASD meltdowns and how to navigate high stress triggers and emotional safety. What happens when one partner's nervous system is screaming danger while the other partner's nervous system is collapsing under overload? What happens when trauma hypervigilance collides with an autistic meltdown? For many neurodiverse couples, this is not just an argument, it becomes a full nervous system emergency. One partner experiences emotional unpredictability as unsafe because of CPTSD. The other experiences emotional intensity, sensory overload, or relational demands as neurologically unbearable because of autism. And suddenly, the home stops feeling like a relationship and starts feeling like a tactical war zone. Every tone matters, every facial expression matters, every silence matters, every door closing feels loaded. One partner scans for abandonment, rejection, or emotional danger. The other partner's brain is trying desperately to shut down incoming stimuli before the system crashes completely. And the tragedy is this: both people are often trying to survive, but each person accidentally becomes the other person's trigger. So today, we're going to unpack this intersection carefully and compassionately. We're going to talk about why these conflicts escalate so fast, why neither partner is necessarily the villain, what is actually happening neurobiologically, and how couples can begin replacing defense survival reactions with emotional safety and co-regulation. Because many of these explosive moments are not character flaws, they're nervous system failures. And once you understand that distinction, everything changes. Now, if you're new here, this channel focuses on neurodiverse relationships, autism, trauma, emotional regulation, and helping couples move away from shame-based frameworks toward understanding structure and healing. And today's topic may be one of the most important conversations we can have, because when CPTSD and ASD collide inside intimate relationships, couples often misdiagnose each other. The traumatized partner thinks, you don't care, you're emotionally abandoning me, you're cold, you're dangerous. Meanwhile, the autistic partner thinks, I can't survive this intensity. I'm being attacked. I'm constantly being criticized. I can't process all this. I need escape immediately. Neither nervous system feels safe. And without understanding what is happening underneath the behaviors, couples often enter a devastating cycle of mutual re-traumatization. Let's talk about the collision of two survival systems. We're going to begin with the foundational truth. CPTSD and ASD can create radically different nervous system threat responses. A partner with CPTSD often develops hypervigilance. Their nervous system becomes trained to constantly scan for emotional danger, changes in tone, withdrawal, facial expressions, silence, unpredictability, emotional disconnection, rejection cues. Their brain learns danger can happen at any moment, so stay alert. But the autistic nervous system often becomes overwhelmed by emotional intensity, rapid verbal processing, unpredictable conflict, sensory overload, relational ambiguity, criticism, and too much simultaneous input. And when overload hits, the autistic nervous system may move towards shutdown, escape, withdrawal, emotional flattening, loss of verbal access, irritability, defensiveness, or full-blown meltdowns. Now, imagine these systems interacting during stress. The traumatized partner sees withdrawal and panic rises. You're leaving me emotionally again. The autistic partner experiences pursuit or emotional intensity and panic rises. I can't neurologically handle this again. So one partner moves closer while the other partner neurologically needs distance. One partner interprets distance as danger, the other experiences closeness as overload. And suddenly, both nervous systems escalate each other automatically. And this is why many neurodiverse couples feel trapped in impossible relational loops. Not because either person is evil, but because both nervous systems are trying to survive using incompatible emergency strategies. Now let's talk about why meltdowns trigger trauma so deeply. For many trauma survivors, emotional unpredictability feels profoundly unsafe. Raised voices, sudden shutdowns, explosive frustration, slamming doors, emotional disappearance. These moments may unconsciously connect to earlier experiences of chaos, abandonment, neglect, volatility, or fear. So when an autistic meltdown occurs, the traumatized partner may not simply experience stress. Their body may experience, this feels like danger from the past. And here's the important distinction. The nervous system does not always distinguish between present threat and remembered threat. The body reacts first. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, adrenaline surges, cortisol spikes, catastrophic thinking activates. And many trauma survivors begin unconsciously trying to regain safety through emotional pursuit, questioning, reassurance seeking, monitoring, protest behaviors, long conversations that are all over the map, or attempts to force emotional engagement. But here's the devastating irony. These attempts to restore safety unintentionally intensify autistic overload. Because during meltdown states, the autistic brain often loses access to higher order processing. Language becomes harder. Emotional decoding becomes harder. Sensory filtering collapses. So the more emotionally intense the interaction becomes, the less processing capacity may remain. This is why logical conversations during meltdowns often fail catastrophically. The nervous system is offline. You're no longer dealing primarily with relationship skills. You're dealing with neurological survival states. Now, let's reframe the meltdown. I want to say something incredibly important here. Understanding meltdowns neurologically does not mean harmful behavior becomes acceptable. No. Trauma does not excuse abuse. Autism does not excuse intimidation. See, PTSD does not excuse emotional aggression. Emotional safety still matters deeply. But reframing matters because blame-based interpretations often intensify instability. If a meltdown gets interpreted as, you're intentionally cruel, well, then shame escalates. And when shame escalates, defensiveness escalates. And when defensiveness escalates, threat escalates. But if couples begin understanding our nervous systems are collapsing right now, simultaneously, then the goal changes. The goal stops becoming win the argument and becomes restore nervous system safety. That shift is enormous because now both partners can begin asking, what is overwhelming the system? What sensory input needs reducing? What emotional pacing is needed right now? What structure creates safety? What de-escalates both nervous systems simultaneously? This moves couples away from moral combat and toward collaborative stabilization. Now, let's talk about a tactical blueprint for co-regulation. This is what can actually help in real time. We're going to build a practical framework. Step 1, recognize escalation earlier. Most couples intervene way too late. By the time voices rise or shutdown happens, both nervous systems are already flooded. That bullet's already left the gun. The goal is identifying early warning signs. For the autistic partner, this may include sensory agitation, repetitive movements, irritability, shorter answers, being a little more snappy, loss of verbal fluency, increased rigidity, pacing, withdrawal. For the traumatized partner, this may include panic, catastrophic thinking, emotional urgency, fear of abandonment, escalating pursuit, hyperfocus on tone, emotional flooding. Couples need shared language before crisis, not during crisis. Simple phrases matter. For example, you know what? I'm becoming overloaded right now. That has nothing to do with you. It's my system. I'll own it. Or my nervous system is escalating. It's my problem. I need regulation before discussion. I'm not abandoning you. I need some recovery time. I will be the one to come back. I need reassurance before space. Now, these phrases create predictability, and predictability creates safety. Step 2, separate space from rejection. This is huge. Many trauma survivors experience distance as abandonment, but autistic regulation often requires temporary reduction of sensory and emotional input. So couples need structured separation instead of emotional disappearance. Instead of, I'm done, leave me alone, we need, my nervous system is overloaded right now. I need about 30 minutes or so and I'll come back. That final sentence changes everything because trauma often fears permanent emotional loss. Predictable return reduces terror. Step 3, reduce sensory load immediately. During escalation, couples often focus only on the words, but sensory regulation may matter more than verbal processing. Lower the lights, reduce the noise, stop simultaneous talking, slow pacing, decrease physical crowding, pause problem solving. You can't cognitively regulate a nervous system that is physiologically overwhelmed. Step 4, stop pursuing resolution during flooding. This is where many couples accidentally re-traumatize each other. The traumatized partner desperately wants resolution now because uncertainty feels unbearable. The autistic partner desperately wants escape now because overload feels unbearable. And both nervous systems push harder. But resolution during flooding is impossible. The brain regions needed for empathy, perspective taking, and flexible communication are severely compromised. So stabilization must come before problem solving, not after. Now let's talk about emotional safety and how it is a system. Here's something many couples miss. Emotional safety is not created during crisis. It's created before crisis. Safety becomes cumulative. It develops through repeated experiences of predictability, repair, follow-through, non-shaming communication, nervous system awareness, emotional pacing, and relational consistency. The traumatized partner needs evidence that you will not emotionally disappear forever. And the autistic partner needs evidence you will not overwhelm me during neurological collapse. Both partners need safety. Both need compassion. Both need structure. And this is why neurodiverse relationships often require a completely different framework than traditional relationship advice. I feel statements and love languages, that's not going to calm a nervous system. Standard advice often assumes equal nervous system processing styles. But the couples I'm referring to in this video are navigating radically different neurobiological realities. Now let's talk about the most important reframe. I want to end with perhaps the most important thing you can take away from this video. Many couples begin seeing each other as the enemy, but often the true enemy is unmanaged nervous system escalation. The meltdown is not proof of evil. The trauma response is not proof of manipulation. These are frequently adaptive survival responses that became overgeneralized. And healing begins when couples stop asking, well, who is the bad person here? And start asking, how do we create enough safety for both nervous systems to stabilize? Because emotional safety is not built through winning. It's not accomplished through scorekeeping. It's built through understanding, pacing, predictability, and repair. And for many neurodiverse couples, learning co-regulation is not optional. It becomes the foundation that determines whether the relationship feels survivable. Now, if this video resonated with you, I want you to know something. You're not crazy for feeling overwhelmed by these cycles. These dynamics can become incredibly intense because they involve trauma, neurobiology, attachment, sensory processing, and survival responses all interacting simultaneously. But understanding changes things. Language changes things. Structure changes things. And emotional safety can absolutely become more possible when couples stop personalizing every nervous system collapse and begin learning how to regulate together instead of fighting against each other. Now, if this video helped, subscribe for more content on neurodiverse relationships, autism, trauma-informed communication, emotional regulation, and relationship healing. And if you feel comfortable, share below what has helped your relationship create more emotional safety during high-stress moments. See you in the next video. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you. Hey guys, this is Mark. Some of you may not know that I have a lot of books on Amazon. So if you like my videos, you'll like my books. I have several for ASD spouses, for NT spouses, and for the neurodiverse couple. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this link. Feel free to click on that link and see what's available. I'm sure you'll find something that applies to you. So if you're struggling in your neurodiverse marriage, help is available, one click away.